Thank you so much for doing this. Can you just start out by telling me a little bit about, can you just kind of start by telling me what drew you to the podcast and why you reached out to me?
Sure. Okay, sure. Well, first, I would like to say thank you for your time.
Mm.
I am always searching for opportunities to get the word out about autism awareness, disability awareness, but autism is the closest to me because I am the sibling and the mother of individuals with autism. And so I believe it was either just a little bit about me. As I stated previously, I am the mother and sibling of individuals. My son is a teenager, and I have an adult brother who has autism. In addition to that, I do a few roles with the disability community, one being an autism advocate. And I have a company by the name of Speak Up Special Education Advocacy.
Yes, I looked at the website. It's wonderful, by the way.
Thank you.
Yes.
The purpose is to advocate, the purpose of the business is to use my many years of professional and personal lived experience in order to advocate, lead, and support children with autism and their parents to feel confident navigating the special education systems and getting the services they need.
Wow.
I also have some experience on the mental health side, because I know this podcast is dedicated to physical and mental disabilities.
Yes, correct.
And that is so good because not many people focus on both. So
Yeah, that's very important to me. That I'm really attempting to do it all here if I can.
I can tell you have a passion for it, and that's what'll drive you.
Yeah.
And so I am a certified mental health first aider, and I'm certified in being able to instruct other individuals in getting certified in mental health first aid. And basically what that is being able to identify when someone around you, that can be a friend, a neighbor, family member, or even someone out in the street, you are able to identify levels of stress up to things as serious as crisis and suicide, and you're able to connect that person with resources, and you're also able to handle it appropriate. Things such as something as simple as a listening ear helps in knowing what to say in those moments. So that's my background.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. First of all, as a person in the disabled community, I have a physical disability. I have cerebral palsy, but I think the disabled community at large, we're all trying to support each other. So first of all, thank you for everything that you're doing. I think it's huge, especially when it comes to autism, being an advocate and having the experience that you do. You don't hear a lot of that. So I definitely applaud you for being out there and doing everything you're doing, because I don't think I wouldn't be here having a platform like this without people like you out there, and all the support we get from that community. So thank you very much for all that you do first.
You're very welcome.
So you're a sibling of somebody with autism, and I think the sibling relationship, I've touched on it in a couple of my past episodes, but it's very unique to somebody who has a disability. My brother is older, and I'm the one that has the disability, but we've talked a little bit about that dynamic and that relationship and all of that. What were your experiences like, and when was the first time you recognized that your sibling had autism? Was it something that was very open in your household or very talked about, or what was your experience as a sibling?
I am 14 years older than my brother, and when he was diagnosed, or even when they were suspecting he may have a disability, I was not focused on that.
Right.
And that I probably was in my teenage years or early, let's see, was probably in you know what, I probably was older than that, maybe like 18, 19, 20. And by that time I was, off to college, doing my own thing. Um, so to tell you the truth, in that moment in my life, I was not that focused on it. Um, when I was aware of it, because my parents had even moved to a different state, so I didn't see them for a while.
Oh, okay.
But once I became aware of it, I treated them. You know what? To tell you the truth, my whole life has been autism or associated with some type of disability. So I never saw it as different.
Right. You didn't know any
Kind of
difference.
just life.
Yeah.
Which is the thing. It was just life. I was very protective of him, especially when he was younger. Gosh, I was I was really protective of him. And I didn't treat him any different. It was just he was a kid who had severe autism, limited ability to talk, but I talked to him the regular way.
Right.
There were things I had to be mindful of, like wandering, because it was typical to go into a store and be looking one way, and him wander off in another way. And I knew my mom would just she would just lose it. And
Yeah.
I was not coming back home with my brother.
Right.
So those are the things I had to be mindful of. I spent a lot of time with my brother when my mother used to work as a correction officer at a place called Rikers Island in New York.
Oh, yes, I know. Yeah.
And she would have to work 16-hour days sometimes. And so my brother would spend a significant amount of time with me. And we would go to stores. I remember this one time we went to Macy's. And I would have to have my brother come in the dressing room with me. Sometimes he would, depending on who was in the dressing room and the environment, I could have him I had to have him right outside the door and be able to see his feet underneath. Other times, he would just simply have to come inside the dressing room with me. And I remember this one time they would not let him even come into the dressing room, and I didn't like that.
No, I
I can say that was a very early advocacy thing.
my mother's had a couple of those with me growing up, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
I can say I raised sand about that situation because I don't think people take the time to figure out what do you do.
Right. No, they don't. I know for us, I think a big one that my mom and I have, and one of the experiences specifically with dressing rooms, your situation, is one, and then I have a situation where a lot of stores, and they still like to do this, they, for some reason, because the stall that's adapted for dressing rooms and stuff like that, they think it's a place to store extra clothes in, and you have to wait almost 15 minutes in some places for people to get racks of clothes out of there because nobody ever uses it. And then when you want to use it, it turns into a big fight to try to get everything out of there. But yeah, yeah, I know you do. Yes.
Those are the situations that we come across in
Right.
life, and I like this platform because you get to tell those stories of your everyday experiences that no one thinks about, and it's about awareness, it's about understanding, it's about leveling
Right. And I think one of the things that I'm curious about as a sibling, um, one of the things that I'm curious with that is there were a lot of times where my brother had a lot of undue, and I can't thank him enough for wanting to do it, but as you said, wanting to be protective, which I think most older siblings or just siblings in general are very protective of each other. But when you have somebody with a disability, whether it's autism or cerebral palsy, you do feel the need to be extra and overprotective. I know my brother, had some experience, especially when we were younger, of having a lot of pressure brought to bear or feeling the need to protect me, especially when I was getting made fun of by some of my peers, and there were some specific instances where he really had to step in or felt like he had to step in and take up the cause for me, and that was really painful for him to have to do. And it sounds like, if I'm understanding you correctly, or what I'm hearing you say, you've had those experiences as well.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I've had tons of those experiences. With even when I was a little girl in school, getting picked on bullies. Um, I dealt with that with my son. I dealt with that with my brother. And I would say that's pretty natural. You don't want
Stop.
to be harmed, to be hurt, to feel sad, especially due to someone else's poor choices.
Right.
And gosh, it's interesting because even I'm not as protective now.
Right.
What I've learned to do is instill values in both my brother and my son, and also have them, how can I say this, when they're dealing with stress, to be able to channel that stress. So right now my son takes martial arts classes, and he absolutely loves it.
Oh, good for him.
Yes, my brother, when he has when he's feeling really energetic, there are things that he can do, like hit a pillow, or we'll go to the track, and everyone, after we do like a half an hour to an hour around the track, everyone is feeling good.
Right.
So as opposed to me stepping in, I'm still the mama bear.
Sure. Yes, I can tell. Yeah.
But I'm not out growling at people
Yeah.
on a daily basis. One way to combat things like bullying, it is to do things that make you happy. Do things that where you can channel that energy, and also to look at the frame of mind that the person that's bullying really does not like themselves.
Right.
It's the bottom line. I don't like myself, and I need to pick on you. I need to bully you. I need to make you feel some sort of way, because I cannot operate in any other capacity, because I feel inadequate if I don't resort
Right.
to that behavior.
Right.
And there's something going on in my environment, whether it was in childhood, whether it's in adulthood. There's something deeply unsatisfying in my life that this is the only way I can derive a little sense of satisfaction
Right.
by making you feel some kind of way. And so once you do those things and take care of that mindset, you tend to be able to handle things. It cushions the blow, and you're able to handle things a bit differently.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you brought that you are talking about it in those terms, because I was just I was talking to one of my friends who is Native American, and we were talking not in terms of anything specific, but we were talking about bullying and how we went through a lot of it when we were growing up, and we have friends that have gone through a lot of it, and we were talking about when you do get bullied, whether it's and not just people with disabilities, but people with disabilities, whether it's in regards to your race or where you grew up economically, any of those things, when you're getting made fun of, that person that's making fun of you, it's interesting. Now that we're older, we were saying, when you're younger, you don't really have the mindset for that, but now, in our late 30s, it's interesting because if people do say those things, and it's in a different way, but when they do say those things or make those comments, it's really saying more about the other person that's saying it as opposed to anything about me.
And something that you just said is key. When you're younger, you don't have the frame of mind to think that way, and I think it's so important. There are some. I have I'm an affiliate partner with a company called Big Life Journal,
Uh-huh.
and they have these amazing tools for it's not specifically to disabilities, but for children and teens, and it helps them to build their self-esteem, self-confidence, and they deal with things like that to just make that stage of life a bit easier.
Uh-huh.
And I think that more of that needs to happen. More of that needs to teachers and parents and families need to be able to say just what we basically said.
Right.
That when you are being bullied, it's the other person. I think so much bullying goes on because the adults don't know how to deal with it. And how are you? I don't understand it. How are you an adult? How are you a parent? How are you a teacher?
Right.
And unable to deal with bullying effectively. And so that points to a fundamental gap that
Right.
needs to be addressed. It's not hard.
No.
It doesn't require a lot of schooling. It is pretty basic knowledge and people just need the verbiage. People need resources on just how to effectively deal with a bullying situation, how to de-escalate conflict, things of that nature. But I'm so glad you said that. It is the case, and that's why you hear, I think a few months ago, a little girl who had autism committed suicide, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
I don't, at that age, I dealt with bullying that young, but I can't think of it being so extreme that it will come to the point of me considering taking my life, and it just speaks to how much support the young lady had, not only at home but in the school environment, and
It's just the saddest. Yeah.
It is sad, and it is something that needs to be addressed.
And I think too, what's hard for me is I'm 38 at this point, but I remember, and I could still cry talking about it, but probably the worst year that I've ever had. And I think this goes to what you said. Normally I don't share these stories in length, but since it goes so well to what you said, I remember one school that I was in my third grade year, I was really lucky. I had a great family at home, so that really helped me. But, I was just kind of going through life, and I hit third grade, and we had moved to, a bigger school, but they had literally never had anyone in a wheelchair. This would have been the early 90s, in a wheelchair or any kind of disability in that school ever. And they were so excited to finally it sounds bad, but they were so excited to finally get somebody that was disabled in their school. Because it was something they could use. And that was very obvious from the get-go. And what happened was I literally got made fun of, picked on, bullied every single day. And they had these, the teacher thought, the whole school, in fact, thought it was a very good idea to have these, what they called circle rounds. And basically what they did is they sat all of these kids, third graders, keep in mind, around in a circle. And each kid would take turns going through each person or whichever person they were having a problem with and saying, I like it, but I don't like you when you do this. And they were literally allowed to list all of these things that they didn't like about a certain person in the circle with all these kids.
And this was a teacher that came up with this idea?
It was a teacher, yes. And because I was being bullied on a daily basis, it was literally coming to a point where I was one of the only people being talked about. And so I started to cry. And one particular moment, I remember I just couldn't. And you know, when you're that young, you don't know how to articulate. You know, you're killing my self-confidence and you're humiliating me even more. You know what I mean? So, but I remember I started to cry and I got sent to the principal's office because I couldn't quit crying. And that has been something that I still, every time I think about that, is so stressful and so overwhelming. And I really think, you know, I read about all these kids in that situation, and, you know, educators are some wonderful ones, but there's also some not good ones, and we need to pay attention to what the kids are saying. And we need to pay attention to what situations we are putting, not even kids with disabilities, but just kids in general, the situations that we are putting them in. But that was, you know, it speaks to something you said, and I don't know that I had to work really hard to get past that, because what it did was it created in me this thing of, well, then I have to just make sure that I'm likable, that my disability isn't causing problems, you know what I mean, for anyone. And my mom, thank goodness, as soon as she figured out what was going on, because I would come home crying and I would explain to her, you know, that they were making fun of me, but when she realized what they were doing in these meetings, she insisted that they take me out of them, and not have me participate. And that was huge, you know, but by that point, you know, a lot of the damage for all of us as a family had been done. And then when she went in to remove me from they accused her of not having, you know, or talking about, you know, what I needed for adaptions. The resource teacher at the time, which it was called, accused her of not having accepted my disability, because my mom was telling her what she thought I needed. So instead of working with her, she just accused my mother of not accepting my disability and not knowing what was best. So.
For sharing, Sarah. You know, it's interesting how it happens, how it unfolds. I want to stay here for a moment.
Yeah.
I'm going to comment on what you just stated. First, I would like to say kudos to your mom.
Yes.
For having the courage, for supporting your needs, and going up to the school and asking them to remove you out of that situation, that class participation section. Second, I would like to say, I find it interesting when we are transparent and someone, instead of taking it in and being present with that moment, instead they feel uncomfortable with the information that you're giving.
Yeah.
And then they want to deflect that onto you. So what the resource counselor did
Yes.
And this was a poor selection of an activity to engage the students in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then another solution would have been to have, maybe there was some other adult you could have gone to, like a school counselor. And let's say you go to a school counselor. One of the appropriate ways a school counselor should be able to handle that situation is when you come to the school counselor and let them know what's going on, and they say, you have every right to your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they took a neutral stance and did not want to comment on the fact that the teacher made a poor decision
Right.
to have the students do that, she could have kept neutral and stated that you have every right to your feelings. This is not your fault.
Right.
And Sarah, would you like to continue participating in the activity or not?
Right.
And what would have been your answer?
It would have been a big no.
So Sarah, thank you for coming to me with this information. I am going to contact teacher XYZ and let them know that that this may not be the most appropriate, not may, this is not the appropriate project for you, and have you not participate.
Yeah.
Now, if I was the school counselor, it would go a little different.
Right. I would have loved it if you had been.
I would say that, but then I would give to the teacher and say, okay, this XYZ, this is a totally inappropriate project for the students. No student has any business commenting on what they dislike about another student, and I am going to contact the principal and make sure this project does not happen again.
Yes, I would have loved it if you had been. It would have been great. You and my mom would have gotten along great. I can already tell.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, those are just ways. There are ways to
Yeah.
not be in situations like that. Even imparting in children what you don't like. Who's a friend? Who's not a friend? How can you tell who's a good friend? How can you tell
Yeah.
who's not a good friend? How can you tell a bad touch from a good touch? These are things that many people don't want to talk about, or just don't, or just not even think about. But those are the things that we need to have to discuss with school-age children, especially once they get in, at least once they get in elementary school.
Yes. So yeah. I just I wanted to share that story, and thank you for receiving it and commenting on it. I think it's so important. And to sort of stay on that topic with you and kind of transition to your son, because I know my mom has plenty of stories. What was your experience with your son's autism and getting that diagnosed, and how has school been for you guys, or how was it for you guys in trying to being his advocate for that, and then kind of getting into that, because I know it's a very steep terrain that you can find yourself in, especially as a parent.
My pediatrician had some inclination that he may have autism. Then it was like she was just saying he was not developing as he should be, especially after I told her
Sure.
saying the words, and I'm gung ho, like, oh,
Right.
your baby can read you program, and then, no words. So you should consider getting him tested. And I did. Um, and I was told he had PDD then. And so they were like, it's not an official autism diagnosis. It can go either way. And so early intervention was started.
Okay.
Outstanding early intervention team. And so, I was just going with the flow then. It didn't have an effect on me. Well, it was time for him to have another psychological.
Uh-huh.
And this one would determine if he had autism. And so the psychologist was doing, observing and everything. And so at the end of the session, he starts packing his stuff up, and he gets up off the couch and heads to the door. And I'm like,
He's not saying anything. He's not telling.
I said, he's not saying anything. I said, should you ask? Yes, you're going to ask. And so I said, well, does he have autism? And he said, yes. And it was like a butterfly in the feeling stomach. Yeah, butterflies in the stomach feeling. And when he left, it was just, everything just got really quiet.
Uh-huh.
And I cried. I don't think I cried for long, but I cried hard.
Uh-huh.
And it didn't run into weeks. If I cried, if it went longer than a day, it was a couple of days. And then I was just like, this is the life I have been given.
Mm-hmm.
I have a brother with autism, so I know, this is familiar territory to me. Put the pedal to the metal, get what he needs, and get on with life. That is basically how it was. But I'm gonna say it was easier for me to get to the acceptance. One, because I had a brother with autism.
Right, sure.
But two, because I felt it intensely. When he got ready to leave without saying anything, like that feeling,
Right.
it's undescribable. That when you just sit there and you're like, you're at this crossroads. Like he was willing to let the mailman be the messenger.
Right.
When he had the mailman
Sure.
mail me the report.
Yeah, exactly.
He
Yes.
didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And I was like, why would you say anything? But that's on him. But even just that split second where it was like, where I was like, he's not saying anything. Should I ask? Ask.
Yes.
It's a very interesting moment. And then once he left, and I felt it so intensely all through my soul, and I cried hard. And you cry because you don't know what to expect. You don't know. It's uncharted territory. You don't know. It's. I can say my role as a sibling is that I had no idea what my mother
Uh-huh.
was in for. I had no idea the responsibilities. I had no idea the emotion. I had no idea. It's a different one. Like it's so different from once you cross over from sibling to now parent of an individual with a disability. And I was just like, this is what it is. Let's handle it and get it done. I I am grateful for his early intervention team. I've heard nightmares about, the first set of people who see the child. But my experience was phenomenal. The team came together, and we're talking about individuals from different backgrounds. We had an African American, we had a Caucasian, we had um, who was Indian. We had a black male ABA specialist, which is which
Right.
is not typical. Um, we had an Italian occupational therapist, and so all these people came together under one roof and worked cohesively as a unit um, for the progress of one little guy. And I absolutely love the team. Um, I still contact the team members to this day, not as frequent, but we do check in with each other every now and then. Um, and that's how the diagnosis and the beginning went. Um, I can say one of the things that was that got under my skin is when we did have someone new introduced to the team, and I knew they were either not going to make it or not make it long.
Right.
Is when they started to limit. There was one time I had a male had came in. I don't know what position what role he was going to be in Tristan's services, but I remember telling him I wanted Tristan to learn how to swing on a swing and ride a bike. And he was basically telling me that I was unreasonable and this was not going to happen. Um, and I wanted to say, you jerk.
Along with some other expletives, I'm sure.
That's what I wanted to say.
Right.
But I instead let him know in a very professional and resolute way that I don't agree. Um, and that's what I want his goal to be. And I got him out of my house as quickly as possible. Um, and Tristan knows how to ride a bike. Um, the last bike he rode had training wheels. He just got a 20-inch bike.
Oh,
And
good for
I am
him.
enrolling him in the I Can Bike Rider program where they teach you to ride a bike without the training wheels.
Wow. Good
So,
for you.
yes. And he swings. He's been swinging. He's been swinging for a very long time. He's even gone to one of those trampoline parks.
Oh, yeah.
Have those swings.
Yes.
Way up high, and the balls are below. So he's done that. And throughout our journey, we have come into contact with people like that. I would say that's that those are the challenges when you have someone who has very limited thinking and want to put your child in a box. And that, to me, that's just a challenge to say, okay, no, he can get it done, and even if it may take longer than you would like.
Right.
It may even take longer than I would like. But with the proper tools, with the proper resources, with the proper environment, with the proper individuals working with him, it will get done.
Right.
So that has been pretty much the journey, and Tristan is 13 now.
I love the name too, by the way.
And I currently homeschool him.
Okay.
And we are thinking about introducing him back into the public school environment. Public or charter, it's up in the air right now, especially with COVID and getting some cohesiveness with the public school system. But he has had experience in the public schools. He had his experience in private schools. and now he's homeschooling, and he's doing pretty amazing. He he amazes me every day. He's a brave kiddo, and you've got to be brave when you have things like sensory issues, and you have to continue on living through this weird place called Earth.
Yes. Very weird. Getting weirder by the day. Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's been a journey, but it's been a rewarding journey, and he has made me a better mother, a better person, and I absolutely adore him.
Oh, that makes me so happy. And he's definitely blessed to have you for his mom, just like I am to have mine. I can tell you that right now. I know I just met you, but I can definitely tell just by talking to you. Um, yes, absolutely. And talk to me a little bit about. I've always and I may not be asking this the right way, so forgive me. But I know when I was doing a little bit of research with some of the stuff that you sent me prior to talking you to here today, and I know you're very actively involved in a lot of stuff, but you're also actively involved as far as politically, representation wise. And I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, in terms of the services or assistance that Tristan has needed, and, and making sure that there's advocates at level of government to be able to support those services. I know he had a good initial team, but I'm assuming that struggle, still continues. What is one thing that you want people to know, especially when it comes to politically wise and trying to obtain services for your son when it comes to autism? What is it the one thing you want people to know who are maybe outside of it that don't understand it? Also, in terms of, if you are somebody who has a disability, whether it's physical or mental disability or even mental illness, and being of a different race or being in a different area, what effects do you see there, and what's that struggle like?
Excellent question. Oh my gosh, I'm excited to answer this question. What do I want individuals to know? Um, Political, I wasn't really into politics until I took a course called Partners in Policymaking.
Okay.
I'm a Partners in Policymaking grad, and they're they have locations um, in the U.S. And so I would encourage parents to consider courses like those. It was like a 8 9 months um, leadership training program where we met government officials, we learned about Medicaid, we learned about education resources, we learned about um, hospitalizations, we learned about assistive technology. It was a very good course.
Well, I'm gonna have to look into that, definitely.
You got a chance to get FaceTime with leaders in government offices, um, and you learn to provide testimony. You learn how to write a letter to your representative, um, and so it was a really good training. Um, and so I would encourage parents to find a solid training such as that. Parents and self advocates, individuals with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another thing is to reach out to individuals in political offices. You would be surprised who we vote for who do not have our good interests at heart. And
Yes.
that's across the board,
Yes.
Republican and Democrat.
Yep. Exactly. I agree.
I've called a Republican's office and have gotten results. I've
Yes.
called a Democrat's office and was basically blown off. So it's very important to not to find out who people are. You can really find out who someone is when you write them a letter, you write them an email, or you give them a call asking them for help for an issue. Let's say, goodness, let's say um, let's say if someone getting food assistance and you call your representative, they should be able to contact the main person in that government office and find out what's going on, um, and be able to move the needle. And and a lot of times people will just let things happen and
Right.
wait. And I would like to encourage people to be proactive. Do Even if you think it doesn't matter,
Right.
just take one step, one phone call, one top door, one letter, one email. Just do something. Stay in action, and that will you will find out something knocking on the door.
Yeah.
It may not be a result at the first door, but just keep knocking. Keep knocking, and you will eventually get to what you need.
And I think too, it's so important, um, with those services, it's such a hard thing to, and being knocking on doors and doing those things, it's such a hard thing for people to understand who maybe haven't had those experiences, why you need to keep doing that. I know, for my mom and I, um, 4 or 5 years ago, when the political landscape was kind of changing, and I have friends who are Republican and I have friends who are Democrat, and I've voted for both in the past. But when everything was changing so much with the political landscape, we had a situation here where I live where they turned all of our state services into privatization. So basically, that meant that different companies would bid for different things, and I literally lost all my services that I had had. And those services were basically transportation to get me back and forth to work. And I lost those services because I was making too much money and I was too independent. And I started out calling, I just called, our regular State Department, and I was literally told by the customer service rep on the phone, she said, it sounds terrible, but because I said, is there any way that I can keep these services? I'm not in a position, my mom still works full time. She wasn't in a position to be able to drive me back and forth, every single day. She does a lot for me, but, she still has to work also. And I remember asking lady, is there anything that I can do, anything that I can appeal? And the customer service representative says to me, it's going to sound terrible, but quit your job.
No.
Yeah. She said the less you can do for yourself, the better situation you're going to put yourself in. And she said, if you quit your job, then we can get you your transportation back just for medical appointments. We can get you, Social Security, all those things. And I was like, right, but then I won't be able to do the things that I went to school for. I won't be able to help. I live with my mother, and, I contribute financially as just she, everything split. I'm really independent. I won't be able to do those things. And she said, unfortunately, with this privatization, that's the way it goes. She said, quit your job and we can give you all your services. And then that parlayed into my mom going and visiting our state representatives at the Capitol, and they said that they could try to get me back on some services, but then what I would have to do is work up to a copay, which I'd never had to do before. And basically, because I was so independent, that would almost be an $1,100 copay a month to be able to retain those services if I didn't make it up to a certain threshold. And then we were just basically dropped from the system. And so I think, when people just say, like, well, can't you just do this? Or doesn't the state just give you this? People aren't paying attention to when those changes are being made and how it's really affecting people. So that's why it's important.
That brings me to another point, and that is able for individuals with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a way to save a good chunk of money without it affecting your benefits. Um,
Okay.
and so I, I heard you mention earlier, what would I recommend dealing with political wise? What I would recommend, um, for as far as secure, making sure the services are secure, is an ABLE account. Um, and I would recommend going to, sometimes you can just type in ABLE accounts and you'll get to the wrong area. I don't have the exact address, the official department website,
Okay.
so people can go and get an ABLE account so their benefits are not affected.
That would be great.
There are a few things that can be done to make sure services are in place, even when an individual is working.
Right.
And training programs like partners in policy making are very good with going over those options.
That's really good to know. I'm really glad that you were on to be able to provide those resources. That's definitely something I'm going to look into. So I've been asking you a lot of questions here, and I feel like I could talk to you forever. But do you have any? Since you've shared so much information, and I really do appreciate that. Is there anything that you were curious about, or that you wanted to ask me?
Oh, I get to interview you?
Yeah, if you have a question or two.
Goodness. If you had all the time in the world and had all the money at your disposal, and money wasn't an issue, what would you do with your time?
Oh gosh. I would probably, the first thing that I would do is make my home completely, that I live in with my mom, bigger and completely accessible. um, because we've never had a house like that. And we love the place we live in now. It would just be really nice just to have a completely accessible home, for once. And then the other thing that I would do, is I would definitely do more advocating, for people with disabilities. I wouldn't mind. I would really like to be in partnership with, um, people with disabilities that are from, different cultures, people that are in different races and things like that. Because I think, my perspective, I'm a white woman, and I do have a certain amount of privilege, and I know that there's things about my disability that have definitely been made easier by that. And so I would love to partner with and expand and have more opportunity to interact that way, and physically, because of the cost of transportation and stuff, I don't necessarily have that ability all the time, although I try to do as much as I can. But I would definitely travel and do speaking engagements, and I would love to, not even just, here in the US, but all over the world. There's plenty of people with cerebral palsy and different disabilities who, their culture is different and they have different experiences. So I would do a lot of traveling, and I would love to see what their experience is and see how I could raise awareness with that. And just, yeah, I just think more access to things would be amazing, and expanding this platform, as much as I could, and expanding that representation as much as I could. That's probably what I would do right now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering that.
Yeah.
I have two more questions.
Yeah.
If you could meet anyone in the world, who would you want to meet?
Can they be living or dead, or?
Either or.
Let's see. There's a couple of them, actually. I would really like to meet. I always wanted to get a chance to meet John Lewis. I followed. Yep, I followed him a lot throughout his career, especially I'm, not proud of the fact I didn't know a whole lot about him up until when I got a little bit older, but I would really love to meet him. And then another person that I would just really love to sit down and talk to, because I think he gets kind of brushed as not intellectual, but I think he's very intelligent, is Stephen Colbert. Um, I think if you take a second to step back and actually listen to what he's saying, I think he has a lot of, he has an amazing story of survival, but he also just has a lot of interesting things that he uses his humor with, and I love to laugh, and I love sarcasm, and I think that can be a good tool. So, those are probably, I would say, probably two people that really stick out to me. I John Lewis would have been amazing. Yeah.
We have something in common. I like fucking. I'm a huge Larry David fan.
Yep.
Your enthusiasm.
Yes. Yeah.
And the last question, goodness, is what are three things? What are three of your attributes?
Three attributes. I think the fact that I can take one of the attributes that I have, and it's because um, the, of the experiences that I've had, I know enough to take the idea of um, having a disability seriously, but I don't take myself seriously in that sense. So I think it allows me to have a sense of humor and know that I'm able to have conversations like this with you, with people I haven't met before, or even if it's a situation where somebody does say something that's hurtful, they don't realize that it's hurtful. I've been able to engage in that, um, in those conversations, and really teach, because I don't necessarily always think that people are coming at it from a bad place, and I do understand that people use humor a lot to work through things, because I do too. I have an immense respect for the fact that just because somebody, the other attribute that I think that I have is I really believe that everybody has their own personal point of view. And I know for me, one of the struggles has been, and I'll get to kind of explain a little bit more here, but one of the things is I think what we tend to do is, just because I have cerebral palsy doesn't mean that I know what it's like for everybody with cerebral palsy. So that's why it's really important to me. There's different degrees, different spectrums for everybody. And just like in your case, just because I do have a friend with autism doesn't mean that I know what your son's experience is. And that was a big part of wanting to do this podcast. I know that not all of our experiences are the same, because we're each individual human beings with a story that we're bringing to it. So I do have the ability to step aside and let that story be your story. I know that my story as a white woman with a disability isn't going to be the same for a black man with a disability, or a black woman with a disability, or, any kind of race or culture. It's going to be a different story, which is why I take the opportunity I can to use this platform, and I think I've always had the attribute to be able to do that, to really step aside and say each individual's experience is different. So instead of being defensive about who has, a different situation or anything like that, I can open that conversation up. And then the other, I'd say, overall ability that I have is just to listen. I love to hear other people's stories. And there's a lot of times people just need somebody to talk to. And I love hearing what makes somebody who they are. And I think a lot of times we just tend to take things at face value, and we forget that this person has a whole story behind them that has made them who they are. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not accountable for their behavior. That doesn't mean that I'm going to agree and I'm not going to expect certain things, but it does mean that I can at least open up and listen to the story that you're telling me. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
With all that,
Amen. Amen. Um, well, Katrina, thank you so much for coming on. I so appreciate you, and I hope you'll join me again. And just know that I am sending love and prayers to you and your son, um, and your brother and your family. And um, I just think you're amazing. I'm so glad you agreed to come on.
You're very welcome anytime.
Thank you.